Tariff negotiations between the United States and Canada remain frozen this week, despite efforts by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney to defuse tensions with an official apology to President Donald Trump. The disagreement stems from a Canadian promotional video that quoted former US President Ronald Reagan speaking against tariffs, a message that, according to the White House, misrepresented Reagan's actual views on trade policy. The controversy has brought bilateral trade talks to a standstill. The dispute first surfaced in late September when Canadian provincial authorities released an ad invoking Reagan's image and words to underscore opposition to protectionist policies. The ad drew sharp criticism from Washington. President Trump accused Canadian officials of distorting Reagan's position to score political points ahead of renewed tariff discussions. At a press opportunity in Washington, President Trump addressed the matter directly, making it clear that he considered the video misleading and disrespectful. "I have a very good relationship with Mark Carney. I like him a lot," Trump said, pausing briefly before adding, "But the Canadians know that what they did was wrong. Carney was very nice. He apologized for what they did in the ad. It was a misleading ad. He reversed everything. Ronald Reagan loved tariffs, and they tried to make it look different. Carney apologized. I appreciate that despite this acknowledgement, the president made no indication that negotiations with Canada would resume soon." In Trump's words, the relationship with Canada remained personally cordial, but diplomatically strained. The exchange took place during a bilateral meeting captured by the White House press pool. At one point, Trump appeared relaxed, jokingly remarking on the long-standing proximity of the two countries. "The merger of Canada and the United States," he said with a smile, drawing light laughter from aides before quickly returning to the trade issue. Moments later, he added more pointedly, "Look, we're the king of being screwed by tariffs, just so you understand. And I'm not talking about with Canada, I'm talking about with countries all over the world." The president's comments reflected ongoing frustration over what Washington sees as structural imbalances in global trade arrangements, a key theme of his second-term economic agenda. Since early 2025, the Trump administration has linked tariff reductions to new compliance guarantees from partners, including Canada, aimed at protecting US manufacturing and agricultural exports. However, the current standoff has less to do with the mechanics of tariff schedules and more to do with messaging and trust. Trump's team argues that the Reagan quote used by a Canadian provincial government in an anti-tariff campaign wrongly implied that past Republican administrations opposed protective duties altogether. According to Trump, that portrayal was false and undermined his argument that selective tariffs can strengthen domestic industries. The White House insists the issue is about principle rather than policy. One senior aide told reporters that the administration views the ad as a deliberate misstep by Canadian officials seeking leverage in trade communications. The fact that Prime Minister Carney personally apologized was, they said, appreciated but insufficient to reset talks. Footage from the Washington meeting, dated October 7, 2025, shows Trump responding to a reporter who asked why talks had stalled if his relationship with Carney was strong. Trump's reply was brief but revealing. "Because I want to be a great man too," he said, suggesting that political pride and optics played a role in the impasse. Later that month, as the president travelled aboard Air Force One, reporters pressed him again on the matter. In remarks recorded by the DC pool feed, Trump reiterated his stance that Canada's actions had been inappropriate, though he emphasized that Carney himself had handled the apology respectfully. "You know, I have a very good relationship. I like him a lot," Trump said. "But you know what they did was wrong. He was very nice. He apologized for what they did with the commercial because it was a false commercial. You know, it was the exact opposite. Ronald Reagan loved tariffs, and they tried to make it look the other way, and he did apologize, and I appreciated it." These comments made clear that while Trump valued the gesture, he did not consider the matter resolved. Prime Minister Mark Carney, speaking days later in Gyeongju, South Korea, where he attended the APEC summit, confirmed publicly that he had indeed apologized to the US president. Responding to a journalist's question during a press availability, Carney said, I did apologize to the president. The president was offended by the act or by the ad, and it's not something I would have done, which is put in place that advertisement, and so I apologize to him." Carney's comments, delivered calmly and without elaboration, matched Trump's account of the private conversation. The acknowledgement was intended to cool tensions ahead of multilateral discussions at APEC, where both leaders were present. However, the apology did not produce the desired thaw in bilateral talks. The Reagan quote dispute has taken on symbolic importance in Washington, reflecting the fragility of US-Canada economic diplomacy. Analysts note that the two countries have weathered similar communication breakdowns in the past, most notably during disputes over softwood lumber and dairy access, but that this episode touches directly on political perception and national identity. In Ottawa, opposition lawmakers have urged Carney to clarify how the provincial government came to release the controversial ad without federal oversight. The video, according to Canadian officials, was produced by a regional agency in Ontario and aired briefly before being withdrawn after complaints from US representatives. It featured archival footage of Ronald Reagan warning against the dangers of walls and barriers, followed by a slogan opposing new tariffs. The White House took issue with the editing, arguing that Reagan's remarks were originally made in the context of Cold War diplomacy, not economic protectionism. Trump's communications team characterized the ad as deliberately misleading, saying it framed Reagan as an advocate of free trade in ways inconsistent with his record of selective tariffs on strategic goods. By late October, Washington sources confirmed that internal preparations for the next round of tariff talks had been suspended indefinitely. The Office of the US Trade Representative stopped scheduling bilateral sessions with Canadian negotiators, pending what officials described as a restoration of trust. For Canada, the suspension comes at a sensitive time. Prime Minister Carney's administration has sought to stabilize relations with major trading partners following months of uncertainty tied to global supply chain disruptions and fluctuating commodity prices. The tariff dialogue with Washington was seen as a potential milestone in restoring predictability to cross-border commerce, particularly in the automotive and energy sectors. In Gyeongju, where the APEC summit concluded on November 1, 2025, Carney emphasized that Canada remained committed to constructive engagement. Behind closed doors, he met with counterparts from Japan, Australia, and South Korea, reaffirming support for open markets and regional cooperation. Yet in public remarks, Carney avoided direct criticism of Washington, saying only that Canada values transparency and partnership in trade. Meanwhile, President Trump used the same venue to restate his administration's broader trade philosophy. He reminded reporters that the United States seeks fair, reciprocal, and patriotic trade, and warned that countries attempting to play politics with America's past would face consequences. Officials familiar with the White House position say Trump's refusal to restart negotiations should not be seen as permanent, but as a signal that symbolic gestures alone will not suffice. One senior advisor, speaking anonymously, described the matter as a question of respect. According to that aide, the president wants Canada to issue a formal statement acknowledging the Reagan quote as misleading before any talks resume. In Ottawa, government spokespersons have declined to comment further on that possibility, saying only that discussions are ongoing through diplomatic channels. Canadian media report that senior officials are considering ways to clarify the matter without appearing to concede to US pressure. The situation underscores the delicate balance between domestic politics and international diplomacy. In both capitals, leaders face internal audiences wary of compromise. For Trump, appearing firm on tariffs reinforces his administration's message of economic nationalism. For Carney, demonstrating accountability without yielding sovereignty remains politically necessary. Trade analysts note that while the disagreement may appear symbolic, its consequences are tangible. The pause in talks has delayed decisions on several key tariff adjustments affecting aluminum, automotive parts, and agricultural products. Industry representatives on both sides of the border have warned that prolonged uncertainty could affect investment planning for 2026. In the meantime, communications between Washington and Ottawa continue at the working level through embassy channels, but there are no scheduled ministerial meetings. Officials close to both governments describe the atmosphere as frozen but functional, meaning that essential cross-border cooperation, such as energy coordination and defence logistics, remains unaffected. The episode has also drawn international attention, particularly because it unfolded during the closing days of the APEC summit, where leaders emphasised the importance of shared prosperity through resilience. Analysts observed that the public nature of both leaders' statements, Trump's televised remarks and Carney's on-camera confirmation of the apology, highlighted the transparency but also the tension in US-Canada relations. In Washington, aides say the president remains open to future discussions once, in his words, the record has been corrected. Until then, he insists that Canada must demonstrate sincerity beyond verbal apologies. For now, tariff talks between the United States and Canada remain suspended. Both governments acknowledge the need to rebuild mutual trust, but neither side has announced a timeline for resumption. The matter continues to underscore how quickly political messaging can affect international negotiations and how an issue rooted in symbolism can stall real economic progress. The situation remains unchanged. Despite an apology from Prime Minister Mark Carney, President Donald Trump refuses to reopen tariff negotiations with Canada, maintaining that the dispute over the Reagan quote must first be resolved.